She called me at 3 a.m. crying. Third time this month. Same story, different night. And you know what I did? I let that phone ring. First time in 15 years, I didn't pick up. That moment right there, that's what freedom feels like. That's what we're going to talk about today. You see, some of us are carrying around relationships like old winter coats in summer. They're heavy, they're making us sweat, but we just can't seem to let them go. What if it gets cold? We keep asking ourselves. But let me tell you something. Sometimes you got to be willing to feel that cold to appreciate the warmth that's coming. Now, I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. I'm talking about those friendships that drain more than they fill. Those family ties that feel like chains. Those work relationships that keep you up at night questioning your worth. You know exactly who I'm talking about, don't you? That person who just flashed through your mind. Yeah, that's who we're discussing today. I remember this young man, worked with him back in '95. Brilliant kid. Had everything going for him. But he had this friend from high school. Every time this friend would come around, trouble wasn't far behind. One day, police showed up at his doorstep. His friend had been using his address for some illegal activities, almost cost this young man his entire career. You know what he said to me? But we've been friends since we were 14. Like, time invested is a good enough reason to let somebody burn your house down. Let me ask you something. If you were on a boat and it started taking on water, would you keep trying to scoop the water out? Or would you plug the hole? Some of you are so busy scooping water, you don't even realize you're the one drilling the holes. You see, toxic relationships are like credit card debt. The longer you keep them, the more interest they accumulate. And that interest, it's paid in sleepless nights and missed opportunities, in the gradual erosion of your self-worth. You're paying compound interest on someone else's emotional bankruptcy. I had this auntie, sweetest woman you'd ever meet. Every Sunday, she'd cook dinner for the whole family. But every Sunday, she'd also get criticized by her sister about everything, her cooking, her kids, her life choices. But she's family, my aunt would say. 20 years of Sundays, 20 years of leaving that dinner table feeling smaller than when she sat down, until one day she stopped setting that extra plate. Know what happened? He started enjoying cooking again. Started experimenting with new recipes. Some of you are nodding because you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've got that person in your life right now, the one who makes you feel like you need to explain yourself, the one who makes you feel like you're always walking on eggshells, the one who makes you feel like you're never quite good enough. But here's what they don't tell you about letting go and letting go. It's not just about the other person. It's about you. It's about looking in the mirror and being honest about your part in this dance. Because it is a dance, and it takes two people to keep it going. You know what's interesting about pain? We're more afraid of the pain of change than we are of the pain we're already in. That's why people stay in situations that hurt them. The devil, you know, right? But let me tell you something. That new pain, that pain of letting go, it's temporary. It's like pulling off a bandage. The other kind, that slow, constant ache of staying where you're not valued, that's the kind that kills you slowly. I'm going to tell you a story about a woman I met in 2010. She was a successful businesswoman, but every time she'd achieve something, she'd call a college roommate to share the news. And every single time, that roommate would find a way to diminish her success. Oh, you got that promotion. Must be nice having a boss who plays favorites. 20 years of friendship, 20 years of having her light dimmed. One day, she realized something profound. She had become so used to sharing her successes with someone who couldn't celebrate them, she'd stopped celebrating them herself. That's what toxic relationships do. They don't just poison the present, they steal your future. They make you doubt the very ground you walk on. They make you question whether you deserve better. And let me tell you something right now. You do deserve better. Not because I said so, but because that's your birthright as a human being. You know what's funny? We put deadbolts on our doors to keep strangers from walking in and taking our stuff. But we'll let people we know walk right into our lives and take our peace, take our joy, take our sense of self-worth. And we'll hand them the key over and over again. But today, we're going to talk about changing the locks. Today, we're going to talk about what it really means to choose yourself. Because let me tell you something, choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's not just about survival. It's about giving yourself the chance to thrive. Think about a garden for a moment. You can plant the most beautiful flowers, but if you've got weeds choking them out, those flowers don't stand a chance. Some of you have been trying to grow flowers in a garden full of weeds and then wondering why nothing blooms. Today, we're going to learn how to be gardeners of our own lives. You know what fascinates me? How we can spend hours picking out the right shoes, but we'll spend years walking on broken glass in relationships that cut us with every step. And we'll call it loyalty, we'll call it commit, we'll call it love. But love isn't supposed to draw blood. Back in '92, I met a man who spent 30 years working at a job he hated because his father told him, real men don't quit. 30 years of his life gone. Not because he couldn't find another job, but because he couldn't let go of his father's voice in his head. One day, his doctor told him his stress levels were killing him. You know what he said? Maybe that's what real men do. They die at jobs they hate. That day, I saw what happens when we let other people's toxic expectations become our prison bars. Some of you are sitting here right now thinking about that relationship you're in. That friendship that's more habit than happiness. That family member who uses guilt like a weapon. And you're wondering, is it really that bad? Let me tell you something about poison. It doesn't have to kill you instantly to be deadly. Sometimes it's the slow kind that does the most damage. I remember watching my neighbor's daughter playing basketball. She was good, really good. But every time she'd make a shot, her mother would point out what she did wrong. Your elbow wasn't straight enough. Your follow-through was sloppy. One day, this little girl just stopped playing, just like that. She told me it's easier not to try than to try and never be good enough. She was 12 years old, and she'd already learned to make herself smaller to avoid disappointment. That's what toxic relationships do. They teach us to dim our own light. Here's something nobody tells you about toxic relationships. They're not always loud. They're not always obvious. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they're subtle, like that friend who always has to one-up your stories. That partner who makes jokes at your expense and tells you you're too sensitive when you don't laugh. That parent who sighs and says, well, at least you tried when you share your achievements. You see, we're taught to forgive, to be understanding, to be patient. Good things to learn, no doubt. But somewhere along the way, some of us learn to forgive at the expense of our own well-being. We learn to understand others so well that we stopped understanding ourselves. We learn to be so patient that we forgot it's okay to say enough. I want you to do something right now. I want you to think about the last time you were with that person. You know, the one I'm talking about. Now, I want you to remember how you felt in your body. Did your shoulders tense up? Did your stomach tie itself in knots? Did you feel smaller? Your body's been trying to tell you something, and it's time you started listening. Let me tell you about a woman I knew back in 2008. Every time her phone would ring with her sister's number, her hands would start shaking. But she'd answer it every time, because that's what sisters do, she'd say. One day I asked her, what would happen if you didn't answer? She looked at me like I'd suggested she stop breathing. That's when I realized that sometimes the cage we're in isn't locked. We just never thought to check the door. You know what's interesting about bridges? They're built to carry weight, but they also have a limit. Even the strongest bridge will collapse if you keep piling on more weight than it was designed to hold. Some of you, our bridge is about to break because you're carrying weight you were never meant to carry. I've seen people stay in toxic relationships because they're afraid of being alone. But let me tell you something about being alone. It's better to be alone with peace than in company with chaos. Some of you need to hear that again. It's better to be alone with peace than in company with chaos. Think about this. When you're on an airplane, what do they tell you about oxygen masks? Put yours on first before helping others. There's a profound wisdom in that. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't give from a depleted soul. You can't love from a broken spirit. Here's another truth about toxic relationships. They don't just affect you. They affect everyone around you. That negativity you absorb, you carry it home. You take it to work. You pass it on to your children. Like a virus, it spreads. And before you know it, you're not just living in toxicity. You're spreading it. I knew this guy, brilliant musician. Had a band member who was always late, always unprepared, always had an excuse. But they'd been playing together since high school, so he kept making allowances. You know what happened? The other band members, the reliable ones, they started leaving. Good opportunities started passing them by. He was so focused on not letting go of one toxic relationship that he was losing all the healthy ones. Some of you are doing the same thing right now. You're holding on to relationships that are costing you other relationships. You're holding on to people who are costing you opportunities. You're holding on to situations that are costing you your peace of mind. But here's what I want you to understand. Letting go doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you disloyal. It doesn't make you selfish. Letting go makes you human. It makes you wise. It makes you brave. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is look at something you've been holding on to for years and finally admit this isn't working anymore. And that's what we're going to talk about next. The actual process of letting go. Because knowing you need to let go is one thing, actually doing it, that's where the real work begins. That's where we separate intention from action. That's where we learn the difference between wanting to change and being ready to change. The hardest conversation you'll ever have isn't with the toxic person in your life. It's with yourself. Because that's where it all begins, in those quiet moments when you finally admit the truth you've been running from. I remember sitting with a young woman in 2005, successful attorney, corner office, the whole 9 yards. But every weekend, she'd drive 3 hours to visit her mother, who'd spend the entire time criticizing her life choices. One Sunday, she broke down in tears and said something that hit me right in my soul. She said, I realize now I'm not driving 3 hours to visit my mother. I'm driving 3 hours trying to visit the mother I wish I had. That's the first step in letting go. Seeing the truth. Not the truth you wish was there. Not the truth others want you to see, the real truth. And sometimes that truth is ugly. Sometimes it hurts so bad you can hardly breathe. But truth is like surgery. It hurts, but it heals. You see, most of us don't want to admit we're in toxic relationships because that means admitting we've allowed it. That means looking in the mirror and asking some hard questions. Why did I stay so long? Why did I keep making excuses? Why wasn't my own happiness enough of a reason to leave? Let me tell you about a man I knew, owned his own business. Every month, his brother would come asking for money. Every month, this man would give it to him, hoping this time would be different. This time his brother would use it wisely. This time his brother would get his life together. You know what happened? His own business started struggling because he was too busy funding his brother's mistakes to invest in his own growth. One day his accountant sat him down and showed him the numbers. Over 10 years, he'd given his brother enough money to open a second location of his business. Instead, he was on the verge of losing everything. That's what toxic relationships do. They don't just take your present, they steal your future. They don't just drain your energy, they drain your potential. They don't just hurt you, they hurt everything and everyone you could have been helping instead. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking about all the good times. You're thinking about the potential you see in that person. You're thinking about who they could be if only they'd change. Let me tell you something. The cemetery is full of people who died waiting for someone else to change. I want you to do something right now. I want you to think about your life as a movie. But here's the twist. I want you to think about it as if you're watching someone else's life. Would you tell that person to stay? Would you tell that person they deserve this treatment? Would you tell that person to keep sacrificing their peace, their joy, their future for someone who wouldn't do the same for them? You see, sometimes we need to step outside ourselves to see the truth. Sometimes we need to love ourselves the way we love others. Because if your best friend came to you with the same story you're living right now, what would you tell them? Back in 2000, I met a teacher who spent every lunch break on the phone with her adult daughter, talking her through yet another crisis. Every single day. She'd eat her lunch cold if she ate at all. One day, another teacher asked her, if your daughter never learns to handle her own crises, when will she learn to live her own life? That question changed everything. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting people face the consequences of their own choices. Now, letting go doesn't always mean cutting people off completely. Sometimes it means redrawing boundaries. Sometimes it means changing the dance. But here's what's crucial. You've got to be ready for the pushback. Because when you start changing the steps, Your dance partner isn't going to like it. I remember this couple I knew. Every family gathering, the wife's sister would make snide comments about their marriage. Every single time. Finally, the wife said, "If you can't respect my marriage, we'll need to leave." Her sister laughed it off. Thought she was joking. They got up and left. Left the food on their plates, left the presents under the tree, just left. That was Christmas 1998. The sister never made another comment about their marriage. You see, people will push against your boundaries until they realize you're serious. They'll test your limits until they understand your limits are made of steel, not paper. And yes, some people will walk away when they realize they can't manipulate you anymore. Let them walk. Those who walk away because you choose to value yourself were never walking with you in the first place. Here's another truth about letting go. It's not a one-time decision. It's a decision you have to make every single day. Every time that phone rings, every time you see their name pop up on your screen, every time someone asks about them, every time you remember the good times, you have to choose yourself again and again and again. I knew this musician played jazz. Every time he hit a wrong note, his father's voice would echo in his head, calling him worthless. Took him years to learn that wrong notes are part of jazz, part of life. Some of you need to learn the same thing. Just because someone told you you're playing life wrong doesn't make it true. And here's something else about letting go. It's not just about the big moments. It's about the small ones too. It's about not checking their social media. It's about not asking mutual friends about them. It's about not keeping that old text thread just in case. It's about not leaving that door open a crack because you're afraid of closing it completely. Remember this, nostalgia is a liar. It will show you all the good memories and hide all the tears you cried, all the nights you couldn't sleep, all the times you felt like you weren't enough. Don't let nostalgia fool you into going backwards. The day after you let go, the silence is going to feel heavy. That's normal. That space they used to occupy in your mind, in your heart, in your daily routine, it's going to feel like a phantom limb. You're going to reach for that phone to tell them something funny. You're going to catch yourself saving a story to share with them later. You're going to feel their absence like a weight. Let me tell you about a man I knew back in '89. For 20 years, he had coffee with the same friend every morning before work. Every single morning. Then he found out this friend had been spreading rumors about his family, trying to damage his reputation at work. When he finally cut ties, you know what was the hardest part? That empty chair across the coffee shop table every morning. He'd look at that empty chair and feel lost. Until one day, he started bringing a book to read instead. Then he started talking to other people in the coffee shop. Then he started enjoying his own company. You see, nature abhors a vacuum. When you remove something from your life, something else will fill that space. The question is, will you fill it intentionally or will you let it fill up with regret and second guessing? Well, I want to tell you about MS Johnson, my old neighbor from back in '96. Her best friend of 30 years had been borrowing money, never paying it back, always had a crisis that only MS Johnson could solve. When Mrs. Johnson finally said no more, she found herself with all this extra time and energy. You know what she did? She started taking painting classes. At 65 years old, she picked up a brush for the first time. Now, her paintings hang in her children's homes, in local cafes. She found out she had all this creativity just waiting to come out, but she couldn't see it before because she was too busy handling someone else's chaos. That's what happens when you let go of toxic relationships. You find out who you are without them. And sometimes that person is amazing. Sometimes that person is stronger than you ever imagined. Sometimes that person has dreams you'd forgotten. Back in 2002, I met a young man who just cut ties with his entire friend group. They'd been holding him back, making fun of his ambitions, calling him uppity for wanting more out of life. The loneliness was crushing him. But instead of going back, he started volunteering at a local youth center. Found a whole new group of friends who were building things, creating things, growing things. 5 years later, he owned his own business. Those same old friends came around asking for jobs. Life has a way of coming full circle. Here's what nobody tells you about healing. It's not linear. Some days you're going to feel strong like you could conquer the world. Other days, a song on the radio is going to hit you like a tidal wave, and you're going to miss them so much it hurts to breathe. Both of those days are part of healing. I remember this woman, professional dancer. Her dance partner of 10 years was toxic, controlling, but they won competitions together. When she finally left, people told her she was crazy. You'll never find another partner like him. She didn't. She found a better one, won more competitions than ever before. But first, she had to learn to dance alone, had to remember why she fell in love with dancing in the first place. Some of you need to do the same thing. Remember who you were before that toxic relationship told you who to be. Remember what you loved before someone made you feel guilty for loving it. Remember what made your heart sing before someone taught you to be quiet. You know what's beautiful about starting over? You get to write a new story. Not a story about what happened to you, but a story about what you chose to do next. Because that's where your power lies. Not in what happened to you, but in what you choose to do about it. I met a father once, spent years trying to, win his own father's approval. Nothing was ever good enough. One day, he looked at his own kids and realized he was passing on that same need for approval, that same fear of not being enough. That day, he made a decision. He decided the generational trauma stopped with him. He got help, did the work, broke the cycle. His kids will never know what it feels like to think their father's love has to be earned. That's the thing about healing. It's not just about you. It's about everyone who comes after you, everyone who's watching you, everyone who needs to see that it's possible to choose yourself and survive. Not just survive, but thrive. Some people are going to call you selfish for choosing yourself. Let them. Some people are going to say you're giving up too easily. Let them. Some people are going to tell you that you'll regret this decision. Let them. Because here's the truth. The only person who has to live with your choices is you. I want you to think about something. Think about all the energy you spent managing that toxic relationship, all the mental space it occupied, all the emotions it drained from you. Now imagine using all that energy for something else, something that fills you up instead of emptying you out, something that makes you bigger instead of smaller. See, letting go isn't just about ending something. It's about beginning something too. It's about opening up space for new possibilities, new relationships, new dreams, new versions of yourself. There was this woman I met in 2007, spent 15 years being the family peacekeeper. Every holiday, every gathering, she was the one smoothing things over, keeping the peace, swallowing her own feelings to keep everyone else happy. When she finally stepped back, the family dynamics imploded. They blamed her, of course. But for the first time in 15 years, she slept through the night. Started writing again, met new friends who didn't need her to be their emotional support system. That's another truth about letting go of toxic relationships. Sometimes you have to let the whole house of cards fall down. Sometimes you have to let things break so they can be rebuilt stronger. Sometimes you have to let people be upset with you so you can finally find your... You know what's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen? I've seen people walk back into rooms they once felt too small for. I've seen people speak up in voices that used to shake. I've seen people stand tall in spaces where they used to shrink. That's what happens when you finally let go of relationships that keep telling you to be less than who you are. Back in 2001, I watched a woman walk away from a 20-year friendship that had turned into a competition. Everything she achieved, this friend would try to one-up. Everything she dreamed about, this friend would dismiss. A year after walking away, she ran her first marathon. When I asked her why she hadn't done it before, she said, because I was tired of hearing how much faster, better, stronger someone else would have done it. That's the thing about toxic relationships. They don't just poison what is, they poison what could be. They don't just dim your present light, they make you afraid to shine at all. And some of you have been living in that shadow for so long, you've forgotten what your light looks like. I remember this kid, talented artist, used to draw these incredible portraits. But his older brother would always find something wrong with him, always. One day I found all his sketchbooks in the trash. Took me hours to convince him to keep drawing. Today, his work hangs in galleries. But you know what's interesting? He never showed his brother's art again. Sometimes protecting your gift means protecting it from the people who should be celebrating it the most. There's something I want you to understand. The way people treat you is their karma. The way you react is yours. You can't control their actions, but you can control your response. You can't make them see your worth, but you can refuse to let their blindness define your vision of yourself. There was this business owner I knew, had a partner who was always negative. Every idea was impossible. Every opportunity was too risky. Every success was just luck. When she finally bought him out in '99, everyone said she was making a mistake. 5 years later, her business had tripled. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and your growth is the person you keep asking for permission. You see, toxic relationships are like old shoes that don't fit anymore. They might be comfortable because you're used to the way that they hurt, but they're still keeping you from walking your true path. And sometimes you've got to go barefoot for a while until you find shoes that actually fit. I want to tell you about the bravest thing I ever saw. It wasn't someone running into a burning building. It wasn't someone standing up to a crowd. It was a quiet woman in 2010, sitting in her kitchen, finally blocking the number of a sister who'd been tearing her down her entire life. With shaking hands, she pressed those buttons. Then she cried. Then she made herself a cup of tea. Then she started living. That's what real courage looks like sometimes. It looks like choosing yourself when every habit, every memory, every familiar pattern is begging you to keep choosing them. It looks like saying no when you spent a lifetime saying yes. It looks like putting down roots in your own life instead of being a branch in someone else's. Let me tell you something about gardens. They don't bloom all at once. After you clear out the weeds, after you till the soil, after you plant the seeds, there's a time where nothing seems to be happening. But under the surface, those roots are growing strong. Your life is like that right now. You might not see the growth yet, but every day you choose yourself, those roots grow deeper. I knew this man, spent 40 years working with his father in the family business. Every day his father would remind him he wasn't good enough to run it. Every single day. At 62 years old, he finally walked away, started his own consulting business. When people asked him why he waited so long, he said something I'll never forget. I had to become old enough to disappoint my father. Some of you are waiting for permission to disappoint the people who never gave you permission to grow. Here's what I want you to understand as we wrap this up. The universe has a way of making room for what you deserve, but first you have to make room for it. You have to clear out what's not serving you. You have to be brave enough to stand in the empty space and trust that something better is coming. Remember that woman I told you about at the beginning? The one who called me crying at 3 a.m.? Last I heard, she'd started her own support group for people leaving toxic relationships. Turned her pain into purpose. Turned her struggle into strength. That's what happens when you choose yourself. You become a light for others finding their way out of the dark. You see, letting go isn't just an ending, it's a beginning. It's not just closing a door, it's opening a window. It's not just walking away from something, it's walking towards something better, something that aligns with who you really are, not who someone else needs you to be. And yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, there are going to be days when you question everything. Yes, there are going to be moments when loneliness feels like it might swallow you whole. But here's what I know. You were born worthy of love that doesn't hurt. You were born worthy of relationships that don't require you to be smaller. You were born worthy of connections that celebrate your growth instead of stunting it. So today, right here, right now, I want you to make a promise to yourself. Promise that you'll stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Promise that you'll stop accepting crumbs from people who have entire bakeries to give. Promise that you'll stop believing that love should hurt, that friendship should drain you, that family should diminish you, because here's the truth. The very fact that you're here, listening to these words means you're ready. Ready to let go. Ready to choose yourself. Ready to write a new story. And let me tell you something, that new story, it's going to be beautiful. Not because it's perfect, but because it's authentically, unapologetically, magnificently yours. You are not alone in this journey. Look around this room. Every person here has a story. Every person here has felt the weight of relationships that no longer serve them. Every person here has stood where you're standing, facing that choice between what's familiar and what's right. The chapter you're closing might have been long, might have been important, might have shaped who you are, but the chapter's ahead. There are blank pages waiting for you to write your truth. And your truth, your authentic, unburdened, unleashed truth. That's a story worth. So let go. Not because it's easy, but because you deserve to find out who you are without the weight of relationships that don't honor your soul. Let go because your future self is waiting and they need you to be brave right now. Let go. Because every moment you spend trying to fix a relationship that's breaking you is a moment you could be building a life that heals you. Your time is now. Your life is waiting. And you, magnificent, resilient, brave you are ready to